So let's talk about home care in Georgia. If you've ever thought about starting a home care business, you know there are a lot of rules. And if you're looking for care for a loved one, you want to know what a good, trustworthy provider actually looks like, right? Well, today we're going to demystify all of that. We're going to trace the entire journey, from filling out the first application all the way to state accountability. But before we dive into all the regulations, we have to start with the most basic question of all. What are we even talking about here? In Georgia, home care isn't just a general idea. It has a very specific legal meaning, and getting that right is step one. We're going to break this down into 5 key parts. First, we'll define what home care actually is. Then, we'll get into the nitty-gritty of getting your license. After that, we'll talk about building your team, the day-to-day rules of providing care, and finally, we'll wrap up with client rights and how the state keeps an eye on things. All right, part 1. What is home care? Let's lay the groundwork here by figuring out exactly who the state calls a private home care provider and what they're actually allowed to do. Okay, so according to the official rulebook, a provider is basically any business that sends people into someone's home to provide care. Now, this is a really broad definition, but it's important to remember what it's not. We're not talking about facilities like hospitals or nursing homes. This is all about care delivered right where a person lives. The services they can offer are really broken down into 3 different levels. At the very top, you've got nursing services, which, as you'd expect, can only be performed by a licensed nurse. Then you have personal care. That's the hands-on help with things like bathing and dressing. And at the base level, you've got companion or sitter tasks, which are more about support, like making meals or running errands. A single agency can actually get licensed to offer any combination of these 3. Part 2. Getting your license. So, now we know what a provider is. Let's get to the first huge hurdle for anyone starting out, getting that official green light from the state. And trust me, this is where the serious vetting begins. So, how do you actually get licensed? Well, there are a few big steps. You've got to submit a really detailed application and pay the fees, of course. You have to be super clear about what services you'll offer and where. But you really need to pay attention to that last one. The owner has to go through a mandatory criminal background check, and that is absolutely non-negotiable. And I gotta tell you, that background check is not just about checking a box. The whole system is built to protect some of the most vulnerable people out there, so the state has drawn a very hard line. Certain crimes will automatically disqualify you from ever owning a home care agency in Georgia. Period. And as you can see, they are not messing around. A conviction for any of these crimes means it's an absolute no-go. You can't get a license. This is really the core safeguard in the whole system, making sure the people in charge of care are people you can trust. Part 3. Building your team. Okay, so let's say the owner passes the background check, the agency gets its license, now what? Well, a license is just a piece of paper, right? The actual care comes from the team. And Georgia has some very specific rules about who you can hire and what they can and can't do. When you look at the non-nursing staff, there are really 2 main jobs. You've got the personal care assistant, or PCA, who can do that hands-on help, but only after they've had very specific training. Then you have the companion or sitter, and their role is strictly limited to non-personal tasks like housekeeping or transportation. The state draws a very clear line here. The more personal and intimate the care, the more training you need. And that training for a PCA, it's a big deal. The rules require a minimum of 40 hours. But here's the really crucial part. 20 of those hours have to be done before that employee ever steps foot in a client's home to provide care. Part 4, the rules of care. So the provider is licensed, the team is trained and ready to go. What happens next? Well, now we get into the ongoing rules that really shape how care is delivered, every single day. This is a big one. Every single client relationship has to start with a formal, written service agreement. You can think of it as the blueprint for everything that follows. It has to spell out exactly what's being done, how often, how much it costs, and, this is so important, who you call if there's a problem. That means both the provider's number and the state's official number for complaints. And it's not like they just send a caregiver out and hope for the best. Nope. The state requires that every provider has a supervisor who makes regular home visits. They're there to check on the client, make sure the care plan is still working, and see that all the client's needs are being met. So how often do they have to do that? Well, for clients getting that hands-on personal care, the rule is a supervisory visit has to happen at least once every 92 days. It's a regular check-in to make sure there's a higher level of oversight for that more intensive care. And what about for clients who are just getting companion or sitter services? Well, the requirement is a little less frequent, but it's still mandatory. A supervisory visit has to happen at least once every 122 days. The idea is the same. Regular in-person check-ins are a must. Part 5, Client Rights and Oversight. All right, this brings us to our final and maybe most important section. This is all about accountability. How does the state make sure all these rules are actually being followed? And what are the fundamental rights that every single client has? See, the Georgia Department of Community Health doesn't just hand out a license and walk away. They are the official watchdog. They conduct periodic and, get this, unannounced inspections. That's right. They can show up anytime to look at records, talk to staff, and make sure every single rule we've discussed is being followed to the letter. And this gets to the heart of it for you, the consumer. You have the legal right to be involved in planning your own care. You can accept or refuse any service you want. You have the right to know all the costs up front, and you have the right to complain without ever fearing that someone will hold it against you. These aren't just suggestions. They are your legally protected rights. That accountability even continues long after the care is stopped. Providers are legally required to hold on to all client records for a minimum of 5 years. This creates a long-term paper trail, so if any questions or issues pop up way down the road, the records are there. So, we've walked through the whole provider's journey, from the background checks and licensing to the training, the contracts, and the client's bill of rights. Georgia has put a really detailed framework in place. It all leaves us with one final thought to chew on. Knowing all of this, what's the one quality that matters most to you when you're trusting someone to provide care in your own home?